All right, let's talk some college hoops. And there was a lot of stuff that happened this weekend, and the Cole Anthony news is probably the biggest, but I'm going to save it for the end because I don't really feel like it's a meaty topic. If Cole Anthony doesn't play, North Carolina's in real trouble, so we'll get to that at the end. We'll get to Memphis. We'll get to Kentucky in a minute. I do want to start with Gonzaga. And I know a lot of you are mad. And a lot of you are like, why are you starting with Gonzaga? And I know a lot of you don't like Gonzaga. And I kind of get it, right? Like every time that I, as a media person, as an analyst, say something nice about Gonzaga, I get the same feedback. And that feedback is, oh, Torres, they're always overrated, and they don't play anybody, and their schedule stinks, and that conference is whack, and they always get a good seed because of that schedule. And, like, in a way, I do kind of get it, right? Like, I get if you're a Louisville fan listening to this show right now, and you know that in the final 3 weeks of the season, you play at Virginia, at North Carolina, and Duke at home, like you don't want to hear about Gonzaga. You don't want to hear about some team that's playing in high school gyms in January and February, playing in front of 1,000 people at Loyola Marymount or Pacific. I get that. I get if you're a Kentucky fan and you know that you got wars coming up in January and February with LSU and Tennessee and Auburn and Ole Miss. You don't want to hear about Gonzaga. I get that. But I do think that we need to start paying attention to this program. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to tell you why and a reason that I don't think anybody's talking about. But let's start with why I'm talking about it coming out of this weekend, which is very simply this. Gonzaga just got another really nice win. They went to Arizona. They win 84-82, okay? In the context of this season, maybe that's not a big deal. I think Arizona's good. I'm going to have them in my top 20 coming into next week. We don't know if this one win is a big deal. But in the context of what we've seen so far from Gonzaga, it's actually pretty impressive because Gonzaga right now has a resume that includes wins at Arizona, which is a good team, Nico Mannion, Josh Green, all those guys, at Washington, Jaden McDaniels, Isaiah Stewart, Nas Carter, all those guys. Washington's another team that's probably a top 20 team. They beat Baylor to open the season. Quade Green's on that team. Oh, and they beat the same Oregon team that just went to Michigan and got a win. So already this season, Gonzaga has wins at Arizona, at Washington, and Oregon at home. But you know what? Here's the thing. That's not why this is impressive. That's not why I want to talk about Gonzaga. Not because they have 3 wins already over teams that are going to be in my top 20 on Monday. Here is why it's so impressive. Because do you know who Gonzaga lost off last year's team? They lost 2 first-rounders off last year's team. Rui Hachimura, who's averaging 14 points a game, was the 9th overall draft pick from the Washington Wizards by the Washington Wizards. He's gone. Brandon Clark, he's averaging 13 points a game with the Memphis Grizzlies, 21st overall pick. He's gone. Josh Perkins, 5th-year senior at guard. He's gone. Zach Norvell, who signed as a free agent with the Los Angeles Lakers, he's gone. So if you look at Gonzaga's roster off of last year, they lost 3 guys that are currently playing in the NBA, including 2 that were first-round draft picks, and both are really productive. These weren't guys that were just drafted on potential and maybe they'll be good 5 years down the road. They're real players. Those guys are gone, plus a 5th-year senior. And here is Gonzaga now 8 weeks into the season, 6 weeks into the season, whatever it is. I don't even know. I lost track already. And they are sitting at 11-1 overall with 3 great wins, including 2 on the road. But that's not even why it's impressive. Why it's impressive is because who they lost and who they replaced them with. Because this is the incredible part to me about Gonzaga. It's not that they're 11-1. It's not that they have all these great wins. It's look at the roster that they brought back. This was a team that lost 3 guys that are currently playing in the NBA, a 4th player who is now who was a 5th-year senior last year. And let me tell you who they bring back. They brought back Killian Tilley, who I will say was very good 2 years ago, but was very injury-prone. They brought back Corey Kispert, who was their 5th starter, averaged 8 points per game last year. They brought back this kid, Philippe Petrusev, who was the 5th big guy on their roster last year. He averaged 6.5 points per game last year. He's averaging 16 per game now. And they brought back this kid, this guard, Joel Ayayi, who's from France, who was a redshirt sophomore, basically didn't play at all last year. How about this? The last 6 games, he is averaging 15.7 rebounds and 6 assists per game. I think that he is maybe one of the 10 best guards in college basketball right now. I think you could make a case that all 4 of those guys are amongst the top 10 to 12 to 15 players at their position. And these are guys that barely played last year. None of them were highly ranked recruits. This isn't a program that brings in McDonald's All-Americans one after the other like Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky. They shouldn't be this good. And this is the incredible part to me about Gonzaga. If you want to pick them apart about what happens in March and the fact that they've never won a championship and the fact that they have an easy schedule in January, February, listen, I'm not going to argue with you. I'll argue with you that they haven't had success in March, which we'll get to in a minute. But if you just want to say, like, look, I think that my team goes through more during the course of the season than they do, that's fine. But what you can't take away, this program lost 4 starters, 3 NBA players. They brought in 0 McDonald's All-Americans, and they are now going to be a top 5 team with 3 wins already over top 20 opponents. And here is the thought that I had on Saturday night as I watched this team play. That thought was very simply this. We kind of do this thing in college basketball, right? Whenever we have a conversation about who's the best coach in college basketball, who's the best coach, it always kind of boils down to like a person in one of 2 groups. It's either like the all-time legends. Well, Coach K, he's got 5 championships. He's the greatest. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. Well, Calipari, he's got the most tournament wins. He's got the most Final Fours. He's got the most Elite Eights since he got to Kentucky. That guy's the best coach in college basketball. Bill Self won 1 billion Big 12 championships in a row. Roy Williams, 3 national championships. Well, those guys are the best guys in college. Like, those are the best pure coaches in college basketball. Or it's one of kind of the young up-and-coming guys, right? Well, Tony Bennett's won 4 ACC titles in 6 years or whatever he's done. He's got to be in the conversation. And Chris Beard, I mean, it's Texas Tech, and he had him a shot away from winning the national champ. Well, he's got to be there. Jay Wright, 2 national championships in the last 4 years. He's got to be there. But it's kind of crazy to me that nobody even includes Mark Few in that conversation. I'm not saying he's the best. I'm not standing on the table and demanding that you say that he's the best coach in college basketball. But I think there's a conversation to be had, because this is what I was thinking about on Saturday night as I watched them go to Arizona and beat Arizona, is that when you talk about the things that makes a great coach, like the word coach, I'm not talking about recruiter. I'm not talking about a career lifetime achievement award for Coach K or Roy Williams or whoever. I'm talking about things that make someone a good coach. Doesn't Mark Few check all the boxes? Think about it. Player evaluation. This is not a guy that is recruiting off a recruiting rankings list and going and trying to sign the best class every year. So he's identifying players that nobody else sees. He's developing them within the program. This is not a program where you have to come in as a freshman and you're expected to play right away. As a matter of fact, most of these guys are not ready to play right away. Rui Hachimura, who was a lottery pick last year, if you really watch Gonzaga, as a freshman, they couldn't put him on the court because he couldn't contribute at the college level. 2 years later, he's a lottery pick. 3 years later, he's, I don't want to say dominating the NBA, but he's one of the better rookies in the NBA. I mentioned Philippe Petrusev, who is their leading scorer this year. He averaged 6 points per game last year, couldn't get off the bench. Now he's averaging 16 per game against some of the best teams in college basketball. This kid, Joel Ayayi, same thing, couldn't get off the bench for 2 years. I'm telling you, this kid's going to be an NBA first-round draft pick. Just watch Gonzaga. This guy's a first-round NBA draft pick, no doubt about it. So you talk about player identification. You talk about developing guys on campus. You talk about consistency. You talk about having the next guy ready to go when the last guy leaves. I'm not saying Mark Few is the best, but I kind of think he's got to be in the conversation, right? Because again, to really hammer home this point, Gonzaga is not recruiting players that we look at as can't-miss NBA players. Before I came on air today, I looked it up. In Gonzaga's entire history, okay, I actually had a Gonzaga fan tell me this part. They've never signed a consensus 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Never. Zach Collins is the only McDonald's All-American that they've ever signed, and he wasn't even a consensus 5-star. He was a 4-star according to some recruiting services. As I just mentioned, They've only had one McDonald's All-American sign with Gonzaga coming out of high school. That was Zach Collins. They've only had 4 McDonald's All-Americans in program history. The other 3 were transfers. A kid named Micah Downs many years ago who started at Kansas. Kyle Wiltshire obviously started at Kentucky. And Nigel Williams-Goss, who began his career at Washington and then ended up at Gonzaga. So 4 McDonald's All-Americans, 3 of them were transfers. And I just look at it like the guys that they're bringing in who are developing into pros are not guys that anyone saw as pros. Like I told you, Rui Hachimura could not play when he got to campus. But the Gonzaga staff saw something in him that said, like, man, that kid's got a chance. I don't know what it was. I've been around the Gonzaga staff a lot because they play in the West region. They've been in L.A. the last couple years playing in the NCAA tournament, but I don't know what they saw in him that nobody else did. The kid Killian Tilley, I'm telling you, if this kid wasn't injured all the time, this kid might have been a first-round pick 2 years ago. He certainly would have been a first-round pick last year. I think he'll be an NBA player if he can stay healthy, but if you watch him, he's like 6'10". He can run, he can jump, he can pass, he can dribble. I think he might be the best passer out of the high post that I've seen in college basketball this year. This kid Petrusev is awesome. He's kind of a low post player right now, but he's developing. This kid Ayayi that I keep mentioning, I looked it up today. He committed to Gonzaga over Georgia Tech. I'm sorry, but if he went to Georgia Tech, this kid would not be playing at the level that he is. So again, I'm not saying that you have to love Gonzaga, and I'm not saying that you have to drink the Kool-Aid and believe that they're the greatest program in the history of college basketball, and credit to them. But I think it's incredible what this team does year in and year out, the guys that they lose year in and year out, and the fact that they're still having this level of success every single season. It's unbelievable. Gonzaga should not. And by the way, for a Gonzaga fan listening, and we have some Gonzaga fans who listen to the show, this is no disrespect to Gonzaga. But Gonzaga should not be the type of program that loses 2 first-rounders, a third NBA player, and a fifth-year senior at point guard, and play this well this quickly. They shouldn't be. But it's incredible to me. It's unbelievable. And by the way, for those people who are saying, oh, well, they don't win in the tournament, here's the bottom line. Here's what you need to know about Gonzaga. Mark Few has won at least 1 tournament game 10 straight years, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. And oh, by the way, Gonzaga is the only program in the last 5 years to make the Sweet 16 or beyond, 3 Elite Eights, 1 Final Four in that point. So for those who are going to say, well, they don't win in the tournament, 5 straight Sweet 16s. They're the only program in college basketball that can say that. North Carolina can't say that. Duke can't say that. Arizona can't say that. UCLA can't say that. Michigan can't say that. Kentucky can't say that. Louisville can't say that. Michigan State can't say that. Again, I'm not saying if you don't like them, that's fine. Respect them. And I'm not saying that Mark Few is definitively the best coach in college basketball. But I think he's in the conversation, and nobody ever talks about that guy.